Have you ever wondered what document actually governs your business if you're a limited liability company? What about if you're in business with one or a few other people? What would happen if your business partner or one of those partners suddenly wants to go in a different direction? Or worse, decides to leave the business altogether? Well, whether you are starting a business by yourself, with your best friend, or entering into a partnership with a colleague or a few colleagues, things don't always go as planned. And I know that very well as an attorney when I deal with the repercussions. And what you need at the beginning is a very specific legal document in place to go back to when you need to move forward when the unexpected happens. So disagreements can and do arise, priorities shift. Without a proper roadmap in place, though, my friend, those types of changes can leave your business in complete and utter chaos. And that is where operating agreements come into play. Yet, in my experience, so many business owners overlook this crucial document. They just think, hey, I don't need one because everything is fine now, or I'm just in business by myself, or, we all have the best of intentions now, and I don't think anything's going to happen with my partners. We'll figure it out down the road. Spoiler alert, when things are no longer fine, you will wish you had had this in place to begin with. So in today's episode, I am getting into why LLC operating agreements are not just recommended, but in my opinion, essential for any business owner, and particularly in business partnerships, and why I highly recommend having one for yourself as a single member LLC, and then, of course, for multi-member LLCs. We're going to walk through the key components of what I suggest you have in your operating agreement, how it protects both yourself and your partners, or just one partner if you only have one, and why skipping this document is a huge risk that I don't want you to take. So let's get into it. Alrighty, as I mentioned, today's episode is all about that one document that you can't afford to skip, the LLC operating agreement. Let's start off with the basics. What exactly is an operating agreement? So an LLC operating agreement is a legal document. It outlines the rules and regulations for a limited liability company, also better known as an LLC. It is an absolutely binding contract that governs the LLC's structure, management, and overall operations. Here is what a typical LLC operating agreement usually includes. The first thing is ownership structure. So how each member owns the business, it's usually expressed as a percentage. And if you're a single member LLC, it's 100%. And usually if you're a partnership, it's 50-50, or sometimes that changes depending on capital contributions that initially go into the business. So you want that ownership structure very, very clear in your operating agreement. Next is management. How will the LLC be managed? Is it member managed or is it manager managed? And that will also correlate with your articles of incorporation or certificate of formation that you file with your state when you are filing your LLC. Decision making. So in your operating agreement, it's going to explain how decisions will be made, what actions require a certain vote by the members, or if you're just the sole member, what that looks like. Of course, you're going to have profit and loss distributions in there. So how profits and losses will be allocated amongst the members. If you're a single member, that's pretty straightforward, but it's really important for distributions for multi-member LLCs because oftentimes you want to keep a certain amount of profit in your business and then distributions will come thereafter. Next is voting rights. So voting rights of each member, including their voting share. And then if you're a single member LLC, what happens to your voting rights if you decide to bring on additional members? In correlation with that is holding meetings. So in your operating agreement, it kind of wants to explain like how and when they are held. This is a little bit more formal when you have multi-member LLCs, a little less formal for when you're a single member LLC, but it's important to have nonetheless in your operating agreement because a single member LLC should still be technically, quote unquote, holding their own meeting at least once a year to kind of go over business operations. And then the final thing is kind of buyout, buy-sell provisions, and if you're winding up the business and dissolving it. So what happens when you as a single member LLC want to leave and or sell the business? Or what happens if a member dies or if you die in the business and the dissolution there? Winding up of the business is probably one of the most complicated legal things that occurs that a lot of us don't think about at the get-go. And it is that type of exit strategy all needs to go into your operating agreement. Now, I just listed out all of these things, but the one thing that I will say is operating agreements don't have to be overly complex, okay? Yes, the more detailed and tailored it is to your business, the better off you'll be. You kind of want to, though, think of it as more of a business blueprint at the beginning. It gives your business structure, but it also should allow you some flexibility to fit your LLC's unique needs, whether that's single member, you're a solo entrepreneur just doing this yourself, or if you have partners or you're interested in potentially bringing partners on down the line. One of the biggest perks, though, of an operating agreement is that it helps protect LLC members from personal liability. Now, I know you've heard me talk about this on the Legal Paige podcast before on why I love limited liability companies. They're pass-through taxation entities, just like sole proprietorships, but they offer you kind of relief from personal liability because it keeps all of your business risk and liabilities in its own LLC bubble, unless you pierce the corporate veil, which means you're piercing the bubble if you are doing intentional acts as the owner that could impact your business. However, what an operating agreement does is it really solidifies that. So that's why I'm always telling people, like, you kind of forgot this step. Yes, you filed your LLC with the state, but did you actually make a document explaining, okay, what is happening with personal liability of all the members? And without an operating agreement, sometimes your LLC can actually still look like a sole proprietorship in the eyes of the law. And that's what I don't want you to do. And this means that unlike an LLC where the business is treated as that separate entity or separate bubble that I've talked about many times, your personal assets could be at risk if something goes wrong with the business. And I don't want that to happen, especially if you're a single member LLC. So an operating agreement, it serves as like a double barrier there. So you file with your state, you get registered as an LLC, and then you also have an operating agreement in place that solidifies all of that and the separation of personal liability for all members involved. Another key benefit of an operating agreement is clarity. That's why I love contracts to begin with, and that's why you should love contracts. And this is your business contract, right? How the business is going down, and everything is involved in that operating agreement. So when I say it outlines how your business will run, that is the be all end all of why this operating agreement is so important. Don't we always want to fall back on a contract and like verbiage and written documentation regarding, wait, how is my business run again? What am I doing as the member? How is this LLC set up? Do I get certain distributions? Do I get, office allocations, things along those lines? Ultimately, you just want less confusion and fewer disputes down the road. Of course, multi-member LLCs, there's no way of getting around. You have to have an operating agreement in place. And I highly recommend it for single member LLCs. I think it's a little bit more optional for single member LLCs, but I think it's a non-negotiable for multi-member LLCs because it sets out the rules for everything like decision-making, day-to-day tasks, making big business moves. And those types of big business moves are absolutely smoother and easier when you have an operating agreement in place because you can utilize those, you can modify them or change them, and then you can just amend your operating agreement to what you need to do with that big business move. If you're maybe, say, allocating a certain portion of your P&L to like a big business expense, so to speak, and how that will affect the members involved. Now, the best part of an LLC operating agreement, like I said, is you can customize it to fit your specific needs. So usually it is a pretty specific document with all of the things I listed out need to be in there. It is a little bit more cookie cutter, I would say, of a legal document, but I don't want you to feel like the cookie cutter template means you have to fit into this one specific mold. You can absolutely modify an LLC operating agreement to what works for you and adjust it, of course, as your business grows. You can amend operating agreements. I just want you to have one in place to begin with that can grow with you. it is still a living document. As you know, I love contracts being living documents, and I think an operating agreement is absolutely a living document. So one common question that I continually get is an operating agreement the same as a certificate of formation or filing your articles of organization? Those are same. No, they are not. So the certificate or the registration that you file with your state is kind of the official paperwork to create your LLC. So it includes all of the things like your business name, purpose, management structure. So is it member managed, manager managed? Does it go in perpetuity? Is it just a term business? But all of that you file with the state and your address and those types of things, who is your registered agent, that doesn't get into the nitty-gritty of how your business will operate. And that's where an operating agreement comes in by definition, right? It is all of the agreements to how your business is going to operate. Another thing that continually comes up is like, Paige, well, aren't there like state laws that govern all of this and how businesses operate and what happens with partnerships? Yeah, there are per state. But if you have an operating agreement in place, just like you have a client agreement in place, oftentimes those trump state default rules. So if you don't have an operating agreement in place, then the state default rules kick in if something isn't clear or agreed upon within your business and the operations of your business or the dissolution of your business or the selling of your business. And you need to reduce the risk and set up your business for long-term success within your operating agreement. Why would you just leave anything to chance? And I always say that when I'm talking about client contracts. You guys can contractually obligate yourselves to do X, Y, Z in, a certain circumstance, and you can do the same thing for your business and the way that it operates. Here's why operating agreements are absolutely necessary in partnerships. And these are called multi-member LLCs. People sometimes get them confused with LLPs. So a limited liability partnership is something that you can elect to become in your state, but that's usually common amongst licensed professionals like accountants, attorneys, architects. Those types of people become LLCs, and usually you're just going to become a multi-member LLC. So if you get confused when you're filing things online, just to know the difference between the two. But I'm going to just go through a few bullet points here of why you need an operating agreement in partnerships and when you have multi-members involved in the business. So I explained at the beginning kind of the general, it defines ownership and roles within your company. And an operating agreement has to explain, okay, each partner, what is the ownership stake? What capital contribution did each partner bring to the business? What are their responsibilities? You don't want to have any confusion down the line. Is someone's responsibilities, to manage? Is someone's responsibilities to do the banking? Is someone's responsibilities just to be the visionary of the business? Like, what does that look like? And that can all go into your multi-member LLC operating agreement. If you are a solo member LLC, of course, you would own 100% of the company. But if you say own the company with your spouse or a business partner, you want to state in the operating agreement what each person's share is. And then capital contributions, as I've mentioned, are what collateral each person brings to the company. So not only money, but equipment, workspace, those types of things, you want to expressly delineate within your operating agreement. Next is preventing disputes. Of course, any type of contract that you put in place always helps protect or prevent against most disputes. You can't prevent against all disputes, but it usually lays out that clear process for how to resolve disputes so partners don't, end up in messy legal battles if conflicts arise. And of course, the expense of legal battles and who would share that expense, that's all within a multi-member LLC operating agreement as well. So let's say someone wants to leave a business after 2 years of being in it. Very common. I'm actually dealing with this right now through my law firm. I not only have wrote an LLC operating agreement in the past 2 weeks, but I've also been dealing with a partnership breakup. So this happens all the time. If you're wondering, like, why is Paige talking about this? Because it is one of the most important things that you need to think about when you become an LLC. So an operating agreement in those types of situations, if someone wants to leave, they would state exactly how that partner can leave, what is the process on how the share of their business is distributed or bought out, so on and so forth. If you don't have that, then it's just like this messy he said, she said, they said what are we getting at here? Who's doing what? And you kind of have to put the puzzle pieces together, and maybe the puzzle doesn't fit exactly how you want it to, but you can create exactly how that puzzle piece is supposed to fit together with an operating agreement in place at the beginning. If you are a solo business owner, though, an operating agreement, though, helps. Now, if you're a solo business owner, an operating agreement helps your heirs figure out what would happen to the business if you were no longer, in capacitation to run the business, or if you do die. What does that look like? And that should be explained there. Usually you kind of have an appointee of some respect, and you can do that in your operating agreement. You could do that by separate agreement, and that could say so in your operating agreement. But yeah, you want to always think about the things you don't want to think about, not to be morbid here, but any type of exit strategy. What does that exit look like, even if you're a single member LLC? And what are the various ways that you may or may not exit your business? Next is making clear decisions as a business. So operating agreements really help you decide how decisions are going to be made. If you are manager managed LLC, then the operating agreement kind of outlines who's the manager, what they can do on behalf of the business, usually day-to-day tasks, and then what decisions all members then need to do to vote on. And that's usually bigger stuff. So a manager managed LLC, you've got various managers and various, respects of your LLC and then there's various members in there. But remember how I was talking about, well, some members are, silent members in LLCs and they're just getting distributions. Maybe they have a larger capital contribution, but that would be a manager managed LLC where, the other partner is probably the manager of the business and can do all of these other things. But here are the things they can't do without speaking with all the members and voting on. If you're a member managed LLC, and that is usually the default one that I suggest people go to if they are a single member LLC. Okay, member managed LLC is most likely to be correlated to a single member LLC. Sorry, lots of different verbiage here and legal mumbo jumbo, but hopefully you're catching my drift. That will outline whether decisions need to be made kind of unanimously or can be made off of a majority vote. And usually it's a majority, and then you're a single member and you have 100%, and then you're the majority, right? Okay. A operating agreement with partnerships also outlines distributions, contributions, how the business will handle debts as well. So kind of profit distribution, capital contributions, how losses are shared. All of that ensures that really everyone is just on the same page financially. And this is where I see multi-member LLCs go wrong the most. Money, right? Not a surprise there that money equals could be not a surprise there that money equals sticky situations down the road when you're in a partnership. So be careful and make sure you get an operating agreement just for financial purposes. So capital contributions, as I've stated, when you start a business, usually all partners kind of put something into the business. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a monetary amount, but it could be a business space. It could be equipment. It could be know-how and knowledge that comes into the business. That's kind of hard to equate into, a capital contribution, but it could be, right? And so that could be listed out in the LLC operating agreement. Say if one partner is not in a place to contribute, sometimes there's a vested schedule in there of, okay, so that partner's distributions are going to go back into the business. So that it's a vesting schedule, if that makes sense. And vesting schedules for partnerships, really, they're just timelines that outline when the partner will then earn their equity in the business. And it's usually tied to the partner's kind of continued service, meeting milestones, paying more and more over time via their distribution, or they have smaller payments that are due over time versus like putting in a huge chunk of change at the beginning that a lot of partners usually can't afford. So although this can be mentioned in operating agreement, sometimes this can also be in a separate kind of partnership agreement as well. But usually you can combine everything into a multi-member LLC operating agreement. And then distributions. So how are members going to receive distributions and when? Sometimes it's monthly, sometimes you put everybody on payroll and that would be explained there. It could be quarterly, it could be yearly. It's really whatever you want. And I would say kind of go wide at the beginning of creating your operating agreement, so yearly. And then if you want to change it to quarterly or monthly, you can do that down the line and just amend those portions of your operating agreement. Distributions also should show priority of payment. So usually the order is going to be debts, and then operating expenses, and then what profit you're going to keep in the business. Really important here. Profit first, wink, wink, and then distributions to the members. So lots of people just think profit equals immediate distributions, and I don't want you to think that way, especially in multi-member LLCs. And then finally, this kind of wraps up what I talked about at the beginning of this episode is operating agreements protect that limited liability status that you wanted from the get-go of creating your LLC. So it ensures the business is treated as a separate entity. It reduces personal liability risk for yourself as a single member or for each partner or member in a multi-member LLC. It lays out how the business is going to indemnify the members of the LLC from suits related to the business and what those suits consist of. Usually like egregious, malicious, intentional behavior would be exempt from that, but any type of negligence that occurs, you would be, not personally liable for, and the business would indemnify and hold you harmless for. And then the operating agreement lays out kind of what laws will apply here, what laws are going to interpret this operating agreement, what state, the business falls under, of course, if there's ever a dispute, and where the suit will take place. Usually this is the principal place of business as, where the business is domiciled. But with partnerships, sometimes it can get tricky because sometimes people don't live necessarily in the same zip code or same county, and you need to kind of come together and agree to that. Otherwise, you're back under default rules, and I don't necessarily want you to be under those, because then sometimes it can be where the action occurred or where the incident occurred and not where the business is domiciled. So be very careful there. Last but not least, a few other rapid fire questions that I have gotten about LLC operating agreements that I want to address here in this episode. So, do operating agreements need to be notarized? Well, in most jurisdictions, it's not really a legal requirement that you have an operating agreement to begin with. So you don't also have to get them notarized. However, I always say that having a document notarized is neither difficult nor expensive. You can just go down to your local bank and do it. So it may be a good idea. And especially in kind of multi-member LLCs, the more legit of a written documentation agreement that you have, the better. Do operating agreements need to be filed? Next question. Do operating agreements need to be filed with the state? The answer here is usually no. So in most jurisdictions, it's not a requirement that operating agreements are even in place, and usually they don't have to be filed with the state. So unlike certificates of formation of articles of organization or articles of incorporation, those do need to be filed with the state. That's all of the, documentation and step-by-step process that you go through online when filing your LLC in your specific state. And then sometimes they'll say, do you have any additional documents you want to upload? You can file an operating agreement if you want there, just to have it, but some lawyers don't like the fact that operating agreements are in the public record. So you don't have to file them with their state. They can also just be an internal document. So yeah, sometimes they're not public record. They're usually just internal governments. Usually they're not public record. They're usually just an internal governance document. It doesn't need to be filed with anyone, but kept within your business unless your state says otherwise. So just make sure you check with your state. Alrighty. So to wrap things up for this episode, an operating agreement, it's a key document. It protects your LLC and ensures that everyone is on the same page from day one, and especially you as a single member know what is going on with the structure of your business. With multi-member LLCs, it provides that clarity, flexibility, helping you avoid unnecessary risks and disputes with all members involved. And whether or not your state requires it, I suggest having an operating agreement no matter what, because it's a smart way to safeguard your business and your business's future. The one thing I'm very excited to tell you about is the Legal Page has always had LLC operating agreements for single member LLCs as contract templates on our website at thelegalpage.com. But myself and my legal team just actually updated that specific document, and we decided to create a multi-member LLC operating agreement in place. So you can go get if you're in a partnership in some respect, you can get a single member. So if you are in a partnership with one or more members, I highly recommend that you get a multi-member LLC operating agreement in place. And we have that now on the website. I also have a little bit of a discount for you. You can find that in the description of this episode. And if you have any other questions about LLC operating agreements and how they work, you can certainly go to the Legal Paige Facebook community to ask all of us in there. Myself and my legal team monitor that group, as well as thousands of other entrepreneurs that may have really good insight for you based on their experience. Or you can reach out to our law firm, Griffith Swazo Law, and we can get on a call and discuss what you may need if you need something a little bit more custom. So that's all I have for you today. I hope this was a helpful episode to go over LLCs a little bit, and particularly LLC operating agreements and why I suggest that you have them in place. So I will catch you guys in the next episode.